Hey everybody, welcome to Craft of the Yeti. I was feeling a little introspective and decided I wanted to create a version of myself in a cave crafting and use that as the intro for my videos. I got this Yeti STL file for free from Printed Encounters Patreon page, link in the description. I love the sculpt but wanted a few different poses. So I watched a YouTube tutorial and did my best to adjust the pose in Blender. I struggled quite a bit, but got a few that I was happy with. I then took the files into Cheeto Box and sent them to my 3D printer, and after a few hours, the Yetis were ready. Now onto the terrain. I cut a base out of XPS foam, and a few more pieces to make the cave. I pulled over the Yeti to make sure I had cut enough foam, and we're good to go. I took each piece of the cave foam and traced the shape out with a Sharpie. I then cut the piece out with my hot wire table, and used the previous cut as a guide as I moved my way up, drawing out each section and making each section a little smaller. Once all the pieces were cut out, I stuck them together with hot glue. I then cut out the cliff face and the door to the cave on my hot wire table. You may have noticed the various cave layers have some pretty obvious seams, so to smooth out the layers, I'm going to use Sculptamold mixed with some gray paint. The mixture is first applied with a popsicle stick before I give up on that and just use a gloved hand. A while back, I made some rocks out of plaster and gray paint. I didn't end up using them for anything, but they will work great here. Once the rocks are in place, I use some more Sculptamold to blend them into the scene. A day or so later, the Sculptamold is dry and I can start painting the cave. I use a variety of ink washes to start the rocks. Randomness is the key here. Well, that and trusting the process. Once the ink washes are dried, I go over everything with a brown-gray dry brush. I'm pretty liberal with the paint here. The next step is to cover everything with a dark wash made of black and brown inks. The last step for the clip face is to dry brush everything with an antique white color, and just like that, we have decent looking rock. With the cave done, I turned my attention to the base. I added some scrap pieces of foam, made sure everything would fit, and then used a foil ball to texture the ground and make it less flat. The cave is then glued to the base. To make the ground more groundy, I used some PVA glue and covered it with construction sand. The glue does a decent job of holding things down, but to ensure nothing falls off later, I spritzed the sand with isopropyl alcohol and then watered down glue. The snow was made with AK Ice Sparkles and AK Terrain Snow. I applied the snow mixture with the back end of a paintbrush and did my best to make the snow look like it had settled naturally on the rocks and in the corners of the cave. While I waited for the base to dry, I started painting the Yeti. First was a blue base coat, adding some highlights. The horns are a gray color that was hit with a dark wash and then dry brushed. I then painted the details like the tusks, eyes, and nails. Then, tragedy struck. I took the Yeti outside to seal the paint I had done, and I dropped the Mini onto concrete and it shattered. Off camera, I did some repairs with paper clips as armature wire and air dry clay to fill in the broken limbs. I bought some gnome hair and cut it into smaller sections. I applied tacky glue to the Yeti and smushed the hair onto the glue. This worked better than I thought it was going to, but it did require a bit of trimming and shaping once all the hair was in place and the glue was dried. The Yeti needed something to sit on, so I made a chair out of balsa wood. Super glue here was my friend. I also think our Yeti friend needs a name. Leave some suggestions in the comments below. And since this is already wood, I can just stain it using an Army Painter speed paint. I wanted our Yeti friend to be crafting and need some tools for him to be using. I made those out of air dry clay and painted them with cheap acrylic paints. I printed a cutting mat onto some paper and glued it to a table I made off camera. I glued all our tools to the table with super glue. Our Yeti friend also should be working on something, so I added some XPS foam. The very last thing I wanted to make was a sign for the cave. I made the sign out of popsicle sticks and stained it with speed paints as well. For the words, I found a font I liked and printed it onto paper. I then glued the paper to the sign and cut the excess off with a sharp blade. To seal that in place, I added some matte Mod Podge. The last thing to do is to add everything to the base. Now, on to the good bits. Thanks a ton for watching. If you enjoyed the video, hit the like button and subscribe for more.